Okay, we'll go to GOTV Pakistan here.
Secretary General Khalid Hamid Farooqi from Pakistan, Geo Television Pakistan. Pakistani Parliament yesterday announced that restoration of NATO supply line from Pakistan into Afghanistan only for non-weaponry stuff. There will be no weapon going through Pakistan, and when ISAF forces will be withdrawn, no weapon will be leaving Afghanistan through Pakistan. You think that that kind of conditions, if you meet, will delay the departure of ISAF or NATO forces from Afghanistan?
First of all, let me stress that, of course, we fully respect the integrity of the Pakistani Parliament and the autonomy of the Pakistani Parliament. We fully respect political decisions taken by the Pakistani Parliament. But let me add to that I also think it is in Pakistan's strong interest to contribute to our operation in Afghanistan. It is in Pakistan's strong interest to see a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. And to that end, we also need seamless cooperation on transits through Pakistan. So I hope that we can find appropriate solutions to that question. In direct response to your question, let me stress that there will be no change in our timetable. We stick to the timetable outlined at our last summit in Lisbon. That is, transition will continue and be completed by the end of 2014. How we will manage that transition in details will be discussed at the Chicago summit.
Kuwait News Agency.
Nawab Khan from the Kuwait News Agency, Kuna. Mr. Secretary General, yesterday the Friends of Syria, met in Turkey yesterday. So any comments on the results of the meeting?
First of all, let me stress that NATO as an alliance is not engaged directly in the Syria issue, but obviously we monitor the situation closely, as one of our allies is a neighbor of Syria and can also be impacted by what is going on in Syria. I appreciate very much the efforts done by the group Friends of Syria to find a political and peaceful solution to the situation in Syria. I appreciate that the UN Special Envoy Annan has succeeded in achieving support from the whole UN Security Council to find solutions, peaceful solutions to some of the problems in Syria. And I hope, based on that, that we will see progress, that we will see reforms in Syria. The only way forward in Syria, like in other countries, is to accommodate the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people and initiate a process that will lead to freedom and democracy. And I hope that an increased international pressure on the Syrian regime will succeed in promoting such a process. And to that end, I think the meeting of Friends of Syria has been helpful.
National Public Radio.
Mr. Secretary, Terry Schultz with National Public Radio and CBS Radio. When you say that enemy-initiated attacks are down, begs the question for me about ally-initiated attacks. And this is something that we end up having to ask you over and over, because in between each of our news conferences, more and more of them happen. An Afghan killed 9 of his colleagues again, Afghan National Police, I believe it was. What can you say anything other than that you continue to be concerned and that transition remains on track? Because isn't that exactly what the Taliban is counting on, that transition remains on track? And even though things are happening within the ranks that could give pause, they're not, and the troops will be out as soon as the schedule was set in advance. Thank you.
It would indeed be a serious misunderstanding if the Taliban think they can just wait us out and wait to see what will happen when international troops withdraw from Afghanistan. If they think in that direction, what they don't take into account is the fact that we will leave behind a very strong Afghan security force. Right now we have around 330,000 Afghan security forces, soldiers and police, a security force that is increasingly capable to take on security responsibilities. The figures I mentioned in my introduction are a testament to that. The fact that the Afghan security forces take actively part in the huge majority of security operations, and that they handle these operations very skillfully, is a clear indication that once we have withdrawn international troops from Afghanistan, the enemies of Afghanistan will be confronted with a strong and capable Afghan security force. So this is the reason why I'm confident that we can fulfill the objectives we presented in Lisbon, and also complete the transition by the end of 2014. Let me add to that, we will not abandon Afghanistan. We will stay also beyond 2014, but only in a supportive role. We will continue a training mission with a view to training, assisting, and advising the Afghan security forces. Yeah, but we have already introduced a package of measures with a view to preventing such unfortunate incidents, a package of measures that include strengthened measures as regards vetting, scrutiny, intelligence, and other measures that can prevent such incidents.
Sophie Zurabiani, Georgian TV company Imedi. I would like to ask you about a meeting with President Saakashvili, which is scheduled tomorrow. So could you give us some details what's on the agenda?
We will, at the meeting tomorrow with President Saakashvili, we will discuss the progress Georgia has achieved within the cooperation programs with NATO. It's a meeting of the NATO Georgia Commission, which is the framework for our cooperation. So we will take stock of the progress achieved within that cooperation framework. We will discuss the regional security situation, and finally we will discuss the upcoming Chicago summit. I'm sure that allies will express their very strong appreciation of the significant Georgian contribution to our operation in Libya, in Afghanistan, Georgia is already one of the largest contributors, and Georgia has decided to double its contribution, which will bring Georgia to becoming the largest non-NATO contributor to our operation in Afghanistan. And of course, all allies strongly appreciate that. It's a very strong testament to the Georgian commitment to the transatlantic alliance. So these will be the main topics, and obviously we will reiterate what we decided already in 2008 at the NATO summit in Bucharest, that Georgia will become a member of NATO, provided, of course, that Georgia fulfill the necessary criteria.
We've got about 10 more minutes. I already have about 4 questions here, just to let you know. James.
Yes, Brooks Senior, Jane's Defense Weekly. I want to come back to capability development. Secretary General, you mentioned AGS as an example of that, but as we all know, this took 25 years to get off the ground, despite the fact that defense budgets throughout this whole time since the fall of the Berlin Wall have declined steeply anyway. So that means we can't really point necessarily only to the financial crisis to speed this whole process up. So my question to you is, what's going to make future capability development qualitatively different and in terms of time different from NATO's past sluggish performance? Is it going to be mandatory NATO technical standards? Will it be the use of a new security label to promote standardized equipment? What will it be? Thank you.
Well, I think there are two elements that will facilitate further development of joint capabilities. The first is lessons learned from operations. Our operation in Afghanistan, obviously, but also the recent operation in Libya. And focusing on the Libya operation, overall a great success, but it also revealed some capability shortfalls, in particular on the European side. And I think it has become obvious to everybody that we need to fill these shortfalls. So the one thing that will facilitate such a development of new, modern, advanced military capabilities, the one thing is lessons learned. Now, the next, paradoxically, is the financial constraints. And that's actually an example that a crisis also provides some opportunities. And during a period of economic austerity, it has become obvious that nations need to cooperate if they are to afford the acquisition of advanced systems. And together, in multinational programs, you are actually able to do more than you are on a national basis, at least for a majority of the allies, in particular for smaller and medium-sized allies. So I think the concept of smart defense will facilitate the development of capabilities we wouldn't otherwise have seen. So this is a reason why I'm quite optimistic about the defense package we are going to adopt in Chicago. And smart defense will be about how to acquire the capabilities. And in addition to that, we have a Connected Forces initiative, which will be about how to make these capabilities work together. And of course, that also includes technical standardization and other measures that make it possible for troops and military equipment to work better together.
Please.
My name is Takashi. I'm with NHK Japan Broadcasting Corporation. in regards to the situation in Afghanistan, it seems you emphasized a lot about your plan has not changed. But apparently, the other side, Afghan side, doesn't share that view. And even the president indicated that they want to see NATO forces out earlier than the end of 2014. How do you respond to that?
But actually, there's nothing new in all this. But maybe it's necessary to clarify these timelines, because sometimes they are mixed up in a way that creates some confusion. Let me stress. We will stick to the Lisbon roadmap and complete transition by the end of 2014. That roadmap is actually based on a timeline outlined by President Karzai himself before the Lisbon summit. He presented the goal to see the Afghan security forces take full responsibility for the security by the end of 2014. And we stick to that. However, in order to actually complete transition by the end of 2014, we need to hand over the last provinces and districts to lead Afghan responsibility at a certain time in 2013. Because based on experience, it takes between 12 and 18 months to actually fully implement a transition. So if the whole of the transition is to be completed by the end of 2014, we'll have to hand over the last provinces to lead Afghan responsibility by mid-2013 or at the latest in the second half of 2013. That's why the year 2013 has certainly been mentioned. It's not about accelerating the transition process, but it's actually in order to stick to the Lisbon roadmap that we have to take 2013 into account. And from the time when we have handed over all provinces to lead Afghan responsibility, we will, of course, gradually change the role of our forces from combat to support, but we will continue our combat operations and be prepared to conduct combat operations until the end of 2014, that is throughout the whole transition period. I hope this explanation clarifies the confusion that sometimes has been created about the year 2013, 2014. This discussion does not change the overall roadmap as it was outlined in Lisbon. We stick to the Lisbon roadmap.
Reuters.
Justina Pavlak, Reuters. Just changing the subject briefly. There was a discussion at the Council of Europe last week about the accident with a migrant boat from Libya in which 63 people have died. And the Council of Europe has asked NATO to release the satellite imagery of the area during the accident. Is NATO considering doing so?
First of all, let me stress that it's clearly in the interest of NATO to provide all the information we can. And we have actually cooperated closely with the Council of Europe to provide relevant information for the investigation that has taken place. And we will, of course, consider carefully all requests for further information. We have nothing to hide. Let me stress that last year, during our operation to enforce the United Nations arms embargo on Libya, NATO rescued over 600 of migrants in distress in the Mediterranean. Now a question has been raised about one specific incident, and to help determine what happened with this particular boat, NATO has provided a significant amount of information to the Council of Europe, and we will, of course, consider carefully any new request for information.
At the back, I think Kosovo media.
Yes, Geracina Tuina from Kosovo Television. Mr. Rasmussen, on Saturday, 2 Kosovar policemen were caught, arrested, or kidnapped, as Kosovo government would say, by Serbian police. Having in mind that everything happened in the border between Serbia and Kosovo, and having in mind that KFOR is in charge of controlling that part of Kosovo territory, do you have any in-depth data of what exactly happened? Thank you.
No, actually, we don't have a full picture of what has happened. Obviously, NATO is concerned about the latest development, but we are confident that responsible parties will be able to resolve the matter.
One there from Arabic media, and then one last question.
Monsieur le secrétaire général Modern Emery Al Hayat TV, vous allez bientôt rencontrer le président de la Commission tout à l'heure, M. Barroso, et un des points, on a entendu à discuter la Syrie. Ma question en 2 parties sur la Syrie. Est-ce que l'OTAN, les forces de l'OTAN sont prêtes à intervenir en Syrie si le Conseil de sécurité l'approuve, ou bien elle va réfléchir encore 2 fois selon le cas de la Libye? Et deuxième partie de la question, si la communauté internationale demande à aider à armer l'opposition syrienne, est-ce que l'OTAN est prêt aussi à y participer?
As I have stated on several occasions, NATO has no intention whatsoever to intervene in Syria. As I mentioned previously, we monitor the situation closely. It's absolutely outrageous what we have witnessed in Syria. I strongly condemn the crackdowns on the civilian population, and once again I urge the Syrian leadership to accommodate the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. I don't think the right way forward would be to provide any group with weapons. I do hope that a political solution and diplomatic solution can be found on the basis of the work that has now started under the leadership of the UN Special Envoy Annan. There's a clear risk that the provision of arms to any group in Syria would also lead to a potentially dangerous proliferation of weapons in the region. So again, I do hope that a peaceful and political solution can be found.
One last question, German press agency.
Birgit Schmalzner, Public German Radio. One follow-up on exit strategy in Afghanistan, if I may. After President Karzai said that he wants the international troops to leave earlier in 2013, I spoke with Afghans, and they say, we are scared. We don't know why, as he's saying this, maybe this will be an excuse for the international community to leave us alone. And of course, the Afghan security forces are not ready at all. What is your... I'm sorry. What's your reaction? Astonishing, or was it scared? Maybe scared as well. I'm sorry.
I understand. I understand the concerns, but let me make 2 points. Firstly, obviously, we can't stay in Afghanistan forever. ISAF is not an occupation force. We are there to help the Afghan people to shape their own future. But eventually, it must be for the Afghan people to take full responsibility for their own country. So this is a reason why we have outlined a clear roadmap for this transition to full Afghan responsibilities. That's my first point. We are there to help, not as an occupation force, so one day it must come to an end. My second point is that we are not just leaving Afghanistan behind, we're not just abandoning Afghanistan. On the contrary, we have trained and educated a very strong and increasingly capable Afghan security force to take on the responsibility for the security beyond 2014. I feel confident that this very strong Afghan security force will be able to protect the Afghan people against enemy attacks. We will stay committed beyond 2014 in a supportive role, continue to train and educate, give advice to the Afghan security forces so we make sure that they maintain the capability to take full responsibility for the security. So this is my answer to the Afghan people, that eventually they must take responsibility for their own country. We will help them on the road to that end state, and we won't abandon Afghanistan. We want Afghanistan to be able to stand on its own feet, but not alone. That's the essence of our strategy.
Thank you very much. Sorry we couldn't take all the questions, but hopefully we'll see as many of you as possible in 2 weeks' time for the meeting of NATO foreign ministers and defense ministers.